begin the discussion, I would like to bring you here, Mr. Hase. You have seen the global smart mobility space, how it has progressed over the years, and how do you see India can follow something from the global scenario, and what are those if we have to take something?
So it's a good question. Yes, as I mentioned before, I'm a German. In Germany, we are classical automotive manufacturing. And I've also worked in the Middle East and in Indonesia and some other region. Yes, it is not an evolution, it's a revolution. It's absolutely the right statement. We can see it also in Europe. The connected car is there already. Each new car is connected, full stop, more or less. And the interesting one is now in Europe, we're also talking about the 5G, like in the US market, and we are talking more about streaming services, which has a strong impact because normally a connected car could mean that you also sometimes can work without connectivity, as I mentioned before. But in the future, with the Spotify services, you have to be always connected, which is a very complex one in the future. And all of them are trying now to move to the big markets, which is China and India, full stop. 1/3 of the world population is China and India. There's the big market. And then try to copy and paste all their technologies to these markets. Yeah. And they're struggling, which is normal because it's too expensive. It doesn't fit, the global platform doesn't fit one-to-one to the India market, and the same in China. It's too expensive, and it is very complex. You have here regulator points. I remember you have national roaming here in India that doesn't fit one-to-one with the European and US technology. That means overall, if you're looking to this, you never can copy it one-to-one from the European US market to the India market, and the same with the subscription management. No? Yes, technology-wise, we can do it tomorrow morning. That's easy. But it's not allowed. Today, it's like hotspot in a car, Wi-Fi in a car. Today, it's not allowed. It will come. You have to be ready for this because you cannot change the technology again and again and again. But this is the movement you can see. I personally believe in 5 to 10 years, India and China could be a driver for these new things. Because, very simple, if it works in India, you can sell it around the world. Okay. Very, very simple, because yeah, it's clear, because technology-wise, if it works here, then you can sell it around the world. So, and from the pricing point, it's the same. If you're addressing it here in the India market, and believe me, I've done this the last 3 years, it's a very complex one, then you can sell it around the world. And this is a huge, huge opportunity for India to make it, design it in India, it was discussed before, and also to realize and produce it here.
So recently I was interviewing one of the Renault Nissan Alliance person. He was saying if we can bring autonomy to India, it is quite possible anywhere in the world. So that's the same statement that you are making. How do you see this, Mr. Gerondeau? How do you see that those kind of changes that has happened in Germany, France, you have worked there? Do you agree with him that is it as simple that if you can do something in India, you can do anywhere? Do you, because you have been talking, because you've been talking about that there is a difference in terms of implementing in every geography. Every market is different. So how do you see that?
Yeah, I think, well, most probably if it works in India, it might work everywhere because the frugality, because of many reasons. But India, and I would say there is not one India, by the way. It depends where in India you are. Oh. If you look at Mumbai, for example, you have 27,000 people living per square kilometer. Obviously, individual mobility is not going to happen. So it's going to be extremely different place by place. And, you can say, okay, autonomous car in today's traffic is going to be a challenge in India. But at the same time, you might take it on the other way around. If you want to have a better use of existing infrastructure, you have no other way but to have vehicles communicating, to increase the capacity of the infrastructure. And I see a lot of smart cities happening in India, And what we see, not only in India, but everywhere in the world, it's basically the cities are taking the lead and are defining the rules in the cities. And you can, and the objective of autonomy is to increase safety, is to maybe to, in the countries where you have a lack of manpower, as you know, I was describing Japan, that's a solution. That's not the case in India. In India, it's a different objective. Probably the objective will be to have a better use of existing infrastructure. So I think each case is going to be different. But I think India as, for me, I see India leapfrogging all the, I would say, the traditional ownership. So I can imagine very, very easily that in a few years, some cities in India will be the most advanced in the world in terms of electromobility, in terms of sharing, in terms of. I have been discussing with some car makers here who really have this vision of trying to go directly to the smart solution.
Bhaskar, I would like to bring you here. We are talking about connectivity, we are talking about smart cities. Companies like yourself is going to play a very big role. So we are talking about smart cities in India, but the progress, do you think the progress happening is what we expect, the way the government is speeding up other projects?
Right.
And what are the challenges that you feel that would come underway when we look forward a connected and infrastructure as well?
So I would say the complexity is there in terms of volumes that we have and kind of use cases that smart cities is getting followed, right? It's not the same. So when you talk about smart city, there is a smart lighting, and then there is a smart dustbin. So each and every use cases are different. And again, to address those, you need a lot of collaboration, from the module side, devices side, connectivity side, and again, the reporting analytics, which is talking again back to the backend servers. So this is again a complex solution that everyone is trying to build in over the period of time. And definitely India is progressing. We have done a lot of things around it. So as Juergen said, that addressing India, it's not an easy, and once you address it, and definitely we can at least have some replica in some of the use cases outside the country. So definitely things are progressing, but it will take some time. And there are, again, the regulation, because there are some regulations also around it. So it has to be more regulated in terms of different bodies that should come across and see, how all these components should work on a standard way, rather than, in a specific user cases. So it will be more, collaborative approach that we need to take.
So I'll go to you, Pankaj. You have been leading the mobility innovation in India. What are the challenges you see when it comes to a smart mobility in India, and which are the pain points you look forward to be solving, and you would expect innovators who can come forward and solve those problems as we leapfrog to future of mobility or smart mobility on the way? Yeah.
Thanks. I think the biggest challenge that we have is the diversity that we have. So to be able to cater to different demographics at different price points with the experience which is commensurate. Basically, at a hygiene level, it needs to be equivalent, but then you can do value layering on top of it. So that, I think, is the biggest challenge, that how does a common infrastructure, common backbone cater to the differentiated expectation of each consumer, basically, without having. The second is the ability to deliver that experience in a manner which is easily the competency curve. How soon can that person learn, I mean, today you look at the person's ability, you download an app, and within some time you expect to be conversant with it. So the question is, how do you overcome that learning curve, the barrier part of it? And the last part is, how do you recover your investment? Because today, for example, thanks to the way the structure has developed, anything which is an app is free, theoretically, kind of thing. And it's in connected vehicle, from US, I can say about a year back, I don't know the latest figures. The companies who are offering connected vehicle service, they actually have to extend the freebie package for another 1 to 3 years, because the consumers, after consuming it for 1 to 2 years, were still not willing to pay for that service. And that's why I brought into my presentation, that unless you give them what they want, why should they be willing to pay for it? Not because you have solved your problem, basically. So for me, these are the kind of three things: that how do I recover my money? And the last part is, what role does the regulatory body or the policy body play in this whole thing? Because they have to be an enabler. Today in most of the cities which have got metros, for example, the data is not available for anyone to build a service on top of it. We talk about last and first mile, but I don't know when the train is coming or when the metro is coming. So that data has to be in the open source, that people can then build services around it to make consumers' life easier, to use the metro in a much more efficient manner.
So if we look at India, after Israel, we see we have a lot of startups coming up, a lot of innovators are coming up. And as we move forward in the mobility space, these guys are going to get a lot of opportunity. If I have to ask you, what are the areas these new innovators or new entrepreneur has to look forward or work in? What are those 2-3 areas that you will recommend?
I think one advantage we have as a country, we don't have a shortage of pain points. Whether it's in the people movement side or goods movement side or communication or whatever. So the challenges galore. Question is, how do you address that problem? And the question is, as a startup, how can I mitigate my risk? How can I mitigate my entry cost by having elements which are enabling me to build on that? Data availability is one such thing, for example, which I gave. So we need a supporting environment. They don't have a shortage of problems. They don't have a shortage of money. Question is, how do they connect these two things to create solutions? Mortality rate of startups in India is much higher than I think Israel has. Because the kind of level of deep tech that Israel uses, the kind of solutions they're working on, is absolutely miles ahead of any other country.
Mr. Guruprasad, you have a different problem. You are already leader when it comes to suppliers in the automotive value chain. Going forward, the scenario is changing. Completely requirement of technology is changing. Do you feel challenged in such a scenario from the newcomers?
Absolutely. I think as I also talked about during my presentation, the mobility of the future is certainly different from what it is today. So in that context, the kind of challenges we've been getting, the kind of new requirements that we've been getting. For example, we never had a mobility service provider giving us requirements on how to build a vehicle, or how to build a component for a vehicle. So this kind of things are certainly changing, and also in terms of the competencies we need, be it in the areas of product design or in terms of data analytics or in machine learning or AI, the complexity in every aspect is extremely different, and it's pretty challenging. And what actually helps for a lot of small companies is that they're very agile. A lot of them work for valuation, so they also want to show something extremely quick. And a lot of them outside are not necessarily slow like the bigger companies, so they're very fast to come up with IP. So the ability for the external industry or the smaller startups and others in the ecosystem to come and challenge the big established players is extremely high. Yeah.
So I'll come back to you again. We are talking about case scenario. In terms of connected, autonomous, shared, and electrified mobility, which one you think is the toughest or giving automobile manufacturers sleepless nights? I'll take your point of view also.
I think it's not either or, because having an electrified vehicle which is not connected takes the ability to deliver an efficient service completely. Shared, for me, I have a bias because I work in that space primarily. For me, that's the key, because as a country, with the kind of infrastructure we have today, the kind of low penetration of mobility means that we have, that's the way to go. And for us, as OEM, we have to find our place. What do I do in that space to enable that solution to be deployed? Do I have a role? And if so, what role can I play in that space?
How do you see that, Guillaume?
I think that's also a very tough question. I think the problem is that everything is interrelated. I mean, if you imagine a world where everybody has an electric vehicle on Earth, 7 billion people having an electric, I mean, that's simply in terms of capacity of production of battery is impossible. So you need to move to some type of shared mobility before getting there. I think that's and important. So, and if you think about usage of infrastructure in the city, you need to have certain level of autonomy if you want to avoid accident, if you want to avoid traffic jams. So I think everything is connected and everything will progress step by step. I mean, in some cases it might...
But for India, which one you think the toughest?
maybe autonomy?
Autonomy.
If I have to give an answer. I think shared is already existing. I think connected is a given with smartphone. I think electric, we see it. And there is a lot of debate about the speed at which it's coming, but we see it coming. So autonomy is probably the challenge, and autonomy will come with a clear direction from local authorities. We will reserve some areas, or for intercity, for platooning, for trucks, for example. I think that's an area where you can increase the capacity of the highway, intercity highways, in a relatively simple way. So I think that will start that way, little by little.
Your take on it, Mr. Hase.
Coming to autonomous driving, if I'm looking how my driver is driving, he's driving very autonomous. So I would say this is already existing, but in a more person-driven part. I would say from what is coming up in the future is, for me, in principle, is the execution overall. I believe we are knowing more or less technology-wise how to solve all the problems, and the technology is more or less existing. It's much more bringing things together and to execute things country by country, city by city. I believe this is the most challenged one, and make it open for the future. So not creating a silo, it's working today, and in 2 years we have to change it totally. That's unrealistic. And the last point I want to address is we have to think about data. We are collecting a lot of data. We haven't talked about this today. Data security, data privacy, what's happened with all the data from the cars which are coming up from the people, not the car itself, the behavior of the driver. We are knowing many more information. I believe this is in the future the most relevant part of this. All the other things in the next 5 years is more or less step by step running, I believe.
So time is almost up. Before going to the audience, I'll just ask 2 questions. One, coming to your shared mobility thing, are we really heading towards a completely shared mobility scenario? Because if you look at some of the data I would quote to give you a sense of the scale India has, every day an estimated 25 million people travel in Delhi metro, 7.5 million take Mumbai local trains, and about 4.5 million people take non-AC bus services in Bangalore. In such a scenario, when we have Ola, Uber, and so many shared mobility, we see these public transport system continue to remain robust. Do you people think that it is going to change anytime soon? Second question I want to understand, we have seen a lot of development around micro mobility, like skates, e-scooters and everything. And then we are also talking about drone, you said, air taxis and all. In such a scenario, do automakers need to worry, or they need to transform themselves to meet those kind of demands? And how far are we from there? All of yeah.
See, for me, public transport is shared mobility. Public transport is not, I was talking to some time back to a lady who founded Zipcar.
That's, okay, that's apart from automobiles, yeah.
No, so I'm saying for me, mobility is as an outcome.
Okay.
Person needs to move, whether he moves or she moves in a bicycle or a car. Question is, do I as a service provider give them a choice to consume that service at the price point they want, in the way they want it, at the time they want it, and feel safe and empowered. For me, public transport is absolutely shared. And Pune, like you said, Pune has a 2% adoption mode share of ride-hailing services, whereas you would assume it was much larger. Public transport is much higher. So we cannot think anything without public transport being at the core or at the backbone of the whole thing. And just to complete that point, this lady was in India for 2 days, and when she went back, and I met her in San Francisco, and she said India already has a shared economy, it's just without digitization. If you can bring a digital layer in, you will bring the efficiency and the income ability of the guy serving service much higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On micro mobility and
on micro
things like
mobility,
hyperloops and all.
on micro mobility, it's definitely a revolution. If you think that this didn't exist almost 1 year ago, and you multiplied by 3 the speed, so you multiplied by 9 the area that can be served by a train station, for example. So you cannot consider one without considering the other. In the past, it was quite simple. Either you had a car or you use public transportation, if you have the choice, where you have the choice. Now it's going to be a continuous gradient of possibilities. With data, you can also completely optimize. You don't miss your train. You know, you can have a much better forecast arrival time. And so it's going to be a continuous, so we are moving from product to experience. So basically it's experience, depending on the day, depending on the weather, depending on your budget, depending on your priority. You will choose different, and you will have new provider of service, say, to go from A to B. You will have, you know, all a panel of possibilities and solutions. So it's a revolution that is coming at a speed where there is no more border between different. It's a combination of new possibilities, and that makes that's why I say you need to imagine the new solution in a digital world. You cannot test. You don't have time to test and correct. You have to do everything in agile way, simulate in a digital world.
One point is I want to compare mobility with connectivity in the future. Connectivity you will get for flat anywhere. That could be 2, 3, 4, 5G, Wi-Fi, whatever. You are connected. And the same will come up in the next 10 years, step by step, in mobility. The customer experience is that sooner or later you want to be in the mobility. You want to use anything for a flat, best case, I never know how it works, for a flat price that you can move into a city with the public transport, with a shared car, with whatever you need. It could be micro mobility, whatever. I believe both of this we can compare. In the future, we want to use mobility, full stop. However it works, this is the customer wishes, I personally believe.
Thank you so much. So now I open the floor for questions from the audience. Please provide the mics.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Dhiren Shrivastava, and I'm from Mozapsis Consulting. And my question is that in one of the slides I have seen when we are speaking about the challenges to adopt these new technologies, one challenge is the organization, okay? And since we are speaking of, you know, a lot of information, a lot of data, then service providers, I will like the views of panelists, whether organization in India, is it ready to take these challenges, you know, to respond faster or to move quicker?
I can start. If you're visiting our customer, let's talk a little bit more about the digital transformation, I would say, in principle. I would say on the top layer, they are absolutely in line. They want to change things. It's more the filter, let's say the filter is more the second or the third layer, because they want to continue in the way they have done before. It's my personal impression most of the time. Top layer, they agree, let's change, let's go in a digital transformation. And it's more second layer partly, but the third layer most of the time, they want to take care, secure where they are today. So that means, but it's not only India that you find around the world, is my impression.
Well, from my perspective, because I travel a lot and I meet players all around the world, and from what I witnessed today, I think India is very aware. I think you still have part of the world where you have some type of denial of the necessity of this change. I don't feel this in India at all. I think that, at least from, you know, as you say, from top level, I think the challenges are very well understood. I think they are very well engaged. And I think, as I said earlier, India has the ability to leapfrog and to come with very innovative solutions. And that's my understanding.
Just to add, in general, India has shown repeatedly that the ability to absorb technology and implement it very efficiently is extremely high. So in every new area that has happened, And soon in the automotive area, we will all migrate to BS6, which is state of the art globally. And in some areas, for example, two-wheeler BS6 is even ahead of most Western countries. So there, the ability to absorb this is extremely high. Pankaj had a nice slide on pipeline companies and network companies or network economy. So I think in terms of our structures, we are traditionally set up as very, very pipeline companies. So we get an input in one end, we deliver an output in the other end. Are we now set up to deal with, at least in terms of company structures, to deal with the network economy, just like how well California does today? I think that's something we all need to really think about and evolve.
I can just give an example to highlight and kind of amplify the point. I was trying to work with a small tech company, and I sent him, I said, let's sign an NDA. I sent them my NDA from the company. Within 30 seconds, it came back saying, sorry, we can't sign this. I was surprised. I said, in 30 seconds, I'm sure you not even opened it and read it, forget reading it, kind of thing. Why would you not sign it? They said, because it's 8 pages long. As a company, we can't afford the legal fee of someone going through 8 pages of NDA. Here's a one-pager that we use, would you like to sign it? So for us, that was a major change, that we were thinking that it's something which is normal. For me, there's a legal team sitting there, that's their full-time job, 10 people doing that day in and day out. But for that guy, it's a cost. Unless we start thinking and anticipating that and being empathetic to that challenge that they have, we'll never be able to work together.
Any other question? Probably.
One thing I just would like to highlight. So I think in India, organizations are more adaptive to the changes. So most of the different requirements are very tailor-made and custom. And the adoption that we have and to try to implement those kind of custom tailor-made is quite fast. And I have seen in many of the cases where the timelines that we have taken and for the project plan and the implementation has been taken very fast on those tailor-made requirements. So I think this is a great uniqueness that we have in India on the organization level. Thank you.
Yeah. We can take one more question.
My name is Shahid. I'm a consultant in energy conservation. My question is to Hase, sir. So in your presentation, you talked about IoT and IOB, that is Internet of the Brain. Will you please elaborate a little on it, sir?
So the world is changing. It's changing technology-wise and also from the business models and all these things. And what we have to create is a really super open mindset of people. So people, especially the young generation, which is coming up here in India, we really have to change so many things. And you need all these brains. How often people are coming into my office, young people, and I'm telling you all the time, please come in, tell me what are your wishes, what you want. And this is a change process. It's a change. Before, normally they're only coming in when you ask them, please come in. They're not coming in. But now they're coming in and they're bringing in things on the table. You can skip 9 of 10 ideas, but the one idea could be a great idea. And this Internet of Brain people, we need more and more. It's the industry, it's the connectivity part, all together, and the universities, and the young and the old people. I'm a little bit older. But we all together have to be a part of this brain. To go ahead and to be a driver in front of all that means we need these brains. And my feeling is India has so many brains. I'm sometimes in universities Sunday morning to teach students. It's loaded. It's full. If I'm doing the same Sunday morning in Germany, I'm sure I will be the only one. The rest, 2 people will be more or less drunken in front of me. So that you can see, and these people we need, and I'm more than happy that India has these people and to go ahead, and this is a huge opportunity.
So one last question from there.
So I know electrification is the way to go forward and it's happening all across the world, but there was a steam about fuel cells, hydrogen cells basically powering vehicles, and that sort of died. I mean, there are certain manufacturers such as Toyota still actively investing in it. So since all of you are from premier institutions within the automotive industry, I just wanted to get your take in terms of, because from secondary research, there's not a lot of data of what companies are doing for this. So what is your perspective on why it stopped and if it's the way to move forward beyond electrification?
I think hydrogen fuel is still in consideration. Honda is working, a lot of companies in Europe is also working.
From an industry point of view,
Yeah.
what is happening because of the electrification wave, it has sort of died down.
Yeah, in India, can you give some perspective?
In fact, not just in India actually. I mean, R&D is happening all across the world because everyone wants to stay ahead. That's not the point, but I'm saying the steam has died. The reason maybe, or if it's still happening, I know certain companies are doing it.
Let me give it a shot. It's not my area, so please, that's the caveat there. I think each technology has a maturity curve from its readiness to deploy, from the cost at which it can deploy, the ecosystem which is required to be enabled to deliver that. In EV, we are much ahead, and as was shown in one slide, EV, they were, I think 60 years back, there was still an EV there. Having said that, I think hydrogen still has that small journey to take as to how do you enable hydrogen to be available at the point of retail in a manner which is safe, at the cost which is right, so that the consumer can, and why, and then last question which I put in my deck, why would a consumer want to use it? And that question, if you don't answer, no technology will have sustainability.
One last question, please. We are already running out of time, so we'll have to wind up with this last question.
Good morning. This is Colin from Robert Bosch Engineering and Business Solutions. Taking note of 3 points basically, right? So we understood that developing solutions for the future is about understand, focus, develop, and satisfy. We also spoke about how customer loyalty is pretty much a thing of the past. So any sort of association that we have with customers now and probably going into the future is going to be pretty much transactional. Like you have that customer's attention very briefly, and they're not sort of willing to maybe pay for a subscription. My question, therefore, is how our business model is going to change, because we are now looking at a situation where developing the technology is not necessarily the challenge. There's no shortage of talent, and we're getting really quick in taking things to the market. But how do we retain that customer? Or how do we make money in that quick instant? Anybody?
Who can answer this?
This is an IoT question.
It's an IoT question. No, I believe it's a generic question. Huh? We talked a little bit about the data and the customer behavior. I believe, absolutely right, I believe the loyalty is really swapping from one to the other, and it's more to using the service. For me, it's much more, I personally believe we have to learn from the customer, and we have to ask again and again. It's an iterative process that we have to see what the customer is doing and optimizing things and working much more in a strong partnership. It's not only selling a car, it's much more selling a service. 50 years before, you have bought a car with high engine, the best engine in town, that's all. Today it's much more, do you have a USB stick for charging your mobile? Do you have Spotify? You have all the new services inside. I believe you have to look much more for the services, and then customers will follow you in groups. I believe there will in the future more partner ecosystems, and you are following more, you are a fan of Apple or you are a fan of the rest of the world. That means it's more some principles, and then they are following different groups, not only one supplier, I personally believe.
So that comes to the end of this session. The speakers will be available offline. You can ask your questions. Sorry, we're not able to accommodate many questions because of the time. Thank you so much once again. Thank you, gentlemen, for